So, welcome to today's special conversation centered on an article recently featured in our Engage Learning educational magazine, Reclaiming Focus: How School Cell Phone Bans Enhance Learning and Wellbeing. This piece is part of our Fall 2025 theme that explores well-being as a pathway to successful school transformation. Before I introduce our very special guests, I just want to highlight really quickly what Engage Learning is all about for our listeners who might not be as familiar. So Engage Learning is an educational media outlet. It's by and for educators. It's a Canadian nonprofit, and we are published by L'École, branchée, who has been in activity since 1996. And for us, everything that we talk about, that we feature in articles, it's always around the challenges of teaching in the digital age, and it's always on a human and relational standpoint perspective. So we have the website there for those who might want more information. This is a sneak peek of the inside of the magazine. We can see on the left-hand side of the screen, we can see the article that will be featured on today's conversation, as well as other ones. And for those on my screen, this is a sneak peek of the actual physical copy, the print copy of the magazine issue. So I do recommend that for those who are subscribed, take a quick peek at that issue. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our very, very special guest, highly respected, highly known provincial pedagogical consultant with LEARN-RÉCIT. Many of you already know Chris through his contributions to Learn's Shift Ed podcast, where I know he spotlights innovative educators, student-focused practices, and Learn services that support learning in Quebec's English sector. So today we're going to delve into Chris's article that was featured in the magazine, Reclaiming Focus, which does take a look at Quebec's recent policy, which was a bell-to-bell ban on cell phones in all public schools. And that was in effect since the start of this school year. So just to quickly set the stage before I bring Chris on, for those who maybe haven't read the article yet, Chris describes the provincial decision to implement a school-wide ban, one that was supported by a pretty unusual, strong political consensus, I think we can say. The policy responds to growing research showing that constant digital connectivity increases mental health risks, such as anxiety and depression. So without further ado, I will stop my share and I will introduce our guest, Chris Colley. So Chris, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for inviting me to talk about this very timely topic that we're facing here in Quebec.
Yes. I'm really happy to have you with us. Is it a pretty strange position for you to be in? Because you're so used to interviewing people for your Shift Ed podcast. So is it your time on the other side?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll see how it evolves as we go along. But yeah, it's a different spot. But change, trying new things. That's what we're all about in education. So I'm enjoying it so far, Nicole. It's been great. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. For us, it's important. We want to make sure that when we address a theme in the magazine, it's in education. It's really centered a lot around what's happening right here in Quebec, in our province. So having you with us, it's very gratifying, and we really do appreciate it. So thank you for your time.
It's my pleasure.
The topic of your article, the province-wide cell phone ban, was pretty controversial when the decision came out. Would you say, is it still controversial now, or how do you feel? What was that like kind of aha moment that made you want to write this piece?
Well, I think the realization of, and I mean, it's such a huge topic, right, Nicole? It's hard to say, okay, is this a silver bullet? I don't think it is. I think it's one step in a bigger picture as to how we have to start thinking about what our kids are exposed to, for how long, and what it's doing to them. Not only in the school environment, but also at home. Home and school have never had to be such partners ever before as they are right now, when they're kind of navigating. You don't have access at school, but at home, homes are all different family styles and traditions. So it's bringing those together. And I think that one of my realizations was not only on the podcast when I have like tremendous guests on that talk so eloquently about um, what not only COVID started with our kids and mental health, but also what technology is also adding on to that plate. And at the same time, another thing that I'm always fascinated with is how we start to learn and how we grow as humans from a very young age, and how that's also getting interrupted by technology. Now, I'm an advocate for technology. I used to teach tech integration. I've supported it my whole career, but it's when you use it and how you use it that really counts. And I think a lot of the time it's hard for teachers to figure out, how do I integrate it in an effective way so that I'm not talking about the technology, I'm talking about what I want the students to achieve and what I want them to learn. So you can see just by this first answer, it's a messy picture, but I do think that this one small step is going to help us start to rethink education and how we're getting our kids, teaching them how to learn about the world and what's around them, and having the tools in their tool belt that can help them navigate it. And oftentimes it doesn't start with, history of 1843 or that mathematical equation. It often starts with the relationships we build and the skills that we collectively build together.
That is such an important point, what you mentioned about relationships, and just the fact that it can be messy. It's not like black or white. It
Absolutely.
has a lot of layers to it. And I think
Totally.
what you mentioned about like families being involved and having to be involved in collaborating with schools, it's a really interesting point, because I actually have young kids myself that are in
Right.
elementary, primary school, and it's that balance between pedagogical and not using the screen time as a reward for good behavior and things like that. So it's been an interesting start to the year.
Absolutely.
I'm glad we're
It
having
it
this
shifted a
conversation.
lot. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with you. And it hasn't been an easy thing that we're asking parents. I mean, oftentimes they're unprepared on their own phone use or insecure, or like maybe I'm using it too much or I'm distracted. And then that has repercussions on the kids, whereas you're consumed by your phone as opposed to building those relationships and that attachment with your kids. And some of that we're seeing in our kids with the anxiety levels, the depression levels. It's not just screens and too much screen use. It's also that removal from building relationships together. It's hard to compete with when you're competing with over 1,000 engineers that design these phones to use. I mean, it's a profit driven market, and they know how to make us addicted to these things. There's smart people out there. Now, we could say the same thing for seatbelts in cars and cigarettes and fireworks, right? I mean, there has to be certain regulations that we all follow across all the boards so that we protect the safety of each other. And screens and social media have really become a well-being issue. It's not just about the technology and how it allows me to connect to the world and flatten the world itself. It's what is all that? How is all that affecting me? How is that interfering with my natural growth of my brain and developing myself, naturally as a human, where nature typically has taken care of all that, right? We know that kids, they need to feel attached, and then they need to get out and play, and they need to be active. And, those two things will build all of our humans. So our role is, can we provide the attachment without the screen getting in the way so that the kids feel they're secure and attached to an adult? And at the same time, can we also support them in getting them outside more, getting them to play more? Technology can be seen as this innovative thing, but it also has this double-edged sword, which removes us away from a lot of nature's way. And I don't want to sound like a preacher of nature, but we all grew up the same way for billions of years, right? Kids grow up, they play, they attach to their parent, they play, they grow, right? We don't teach kids how to do basic skills. We get them through their interaction with doing them. Um, So that's the big picture. I guess that's was my aha moment. I guess coming back to it a bit is that I know that kids are playing way less than they ever have in the history of humanity, and that they're going outside way less than ever before in any generation throughout history. And that is a big concern for educators. And we're seeing the repercussions of this. But I mean, cell phones have been around since 2009, right? The first front facing camera on our phones came around a year later. And that's when social media exploded because finally I could open my screen to myself and share myself
Mm.
with whoever, who knew what was on the other side of that screen. So,
Oh, no, that's a lot.
yeah,
You've said a lot, which it's a lot to unpack, but it's also very, very important because I'm noticing with my own kids that are like 6 and 8, if I
mhm,
gave them the option of sitting in front of the TV or playing a video game or going outside, they're going to choose the screen every single time. So I think
yeah,
as adults, whether we're parents or educators, we need to have that distance where we can decide, okay, no, like we're putting away the screens. And then when you don't give them a choice and like let them be bored. That's what I always
that's
say.
it.
Every
That's it.
single time they will opt to go outside and play in the backyard, or they will invent a game. It's beautiful to watch. But if I don't do that with them, they will pick the screen every time. I just wanted to make that little side note.
Absolutely.
In
Absolutely.
schools, the pedagogical, you mentioned that the why we're using screens, we just need to keep a focus on that, because whether the tool is, it doesn't matter what we're doing with the technology, as long as we keep remembering the why we're doing it,
Yeah,
the plus value that's to use it.
totally.
And I
Yeah.
think I remember at first when we talked about this, when the committee was discussing the whole ban and different things for screen usage, I remember at first thinking I wasn't quite in favor of like banning all of it. But what I find it's interesting, like now when I think back to it, it's seeing how the consensus came together. And it
Totally.
kind of shows how seriously Quebec is taking this issue of youth digital well-being. So looking at it from that perspective, I have to say I'm in favor of that. Like we have to think about their well-being. It wasn't a partisan fight. I didn't feel like it was one party trying to get their point over some other parties. So I do think it shows how strongly the province was taking this
I
subject.
totally agree. It's probably one of the few times in the last long time that everybody came together and had a common consensus that yes, well, I mean, I pulled out some of the stats that they looked at, and that all too so is really shocking to me, like how quickly this is accelerating. Um, they say on average, Canadian teen 7.7 hours a day on screen a day. Like that's insane. It's half, it's the most of a chunk of a day that you're spending not building relationships, not collaborating or communicating, not problem solving, not critically thinking, not learning to a large extent. So, I mean, the stats told us what was going on. We just had to accept it and say, we need to come together and do something about it. Now, once all of the decision was made, it again gets kind of messy because now they're offloading it onto the schools and the centre de service to deal with it, right? There's no real like, okay, here's the mandate. You guys go about implement how you want. So that's been kind of spotty how it's been implemented across the province. Just because you have a central mandate, but then you don't have any recommendations or like strategies for implementing, and it puts schools in difficult positions when you might not have um, a leadership that's pushing everyone in that same direction. So I've heard messy stories, but I've also heard a lot of positive stories that they find kids are back a little bit more. The hallways are a little bit noisier. They're not as chaotic because the kids aren't staring down at their screens as they're walking and smashing into each other. you know, Schools are starting to bring in board games again and like book readings and like, so in the void of screens, what are you going to do about it? Like, great, we got rid of the screens, but now what is the school going to do to make sure that that change keeps going and that we're kind of reversing a bit where we're focusing more on how kids are building relationships together? Because in the end, I mean, that's what life is built upon, is the people we know. We're creatures that want to be needed and wanted and connected with. And if we remove that because we have this artificial thing in front of us, it really has these repercussions. So I don't think that anybody could say outright that this was a bad idea. I think the intent is really, really good, but it's how we're going to deal with it. Not only in our classes, but also at home. And how can we do this together so that there's equity, there's equality across, that it's not done in this haphazard way.
Yeah, no, that's so important. And it's funny because when I had prepared a few questions or thinking of how this was going to go, I'm going to skip ahead to something I had written later, but it's perfect timing because when you wrote the piece, this was not long after the decision came out. So
That's right.
this was before the beginning of the school year. So the interesting part is the article came out in the fall for September for the beginning of the school year. We're now
Yep.
into December. You mentioned the hallways are noisier, people are talking to each other. Have you heard like specific stories or like teachers telling you this went a lot smoother, or like what's kind of your opinion of how, like, I know it hasn't been the same for everyone, but overall,
Right.
what are you
Right.
hearing?
Well, some echoes I've heard is that it's going quite well, that it's not discussed all that much, really. Teachers feel that kids are more present in the class now, that boredom is coming back to be in style a bit, which I love because it's a
Yeah.
developmental tool. Feeling bored is important because you think about things deeper.
Mhm.
It develops your brain. So my kid always would say when I, prevented them from using their devices that, oh, I'm bored. I'm like, perfect. I love hearing that. Be bored for another half an hour. I love it. Until something hits their brain and they're like, okay, I'm going to go try this. And they go off and but it's not this like this doom scrolling where nothing much is done or solved or thought about. It's just endless endorphins and
Yeah.
dopamine hitting your brain that doesn't really benefit much for learning or relationship type building, the kinds of things that school is are built for.
And even for us, for adults, I think it's important for us to be bored too and have that. But you mentioned too, I'm curious, was there a moment of like resistance that you heard about, like where either with parents, because we know that parents, one of the concerns was by taking the phones away, emergencies, how we're going to contact our kids and so forth. Has there been kind of pushback on that perspective?
I
What you've
mean,
heard?
that's one of the excuses I hear a lot of, that, oh, what if I need to get in touch with my kid? Well, I mean, rewind the clock, what, 10 years? It's not that long ago. How did we used to do it? You call a secretary. So I've heard of some schools saying, promising parents that if you call, if there's emergency, for sure we'll get in touch with your student. Some even saying we'll even hire an extra person if we need to just answer all the calls.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, though, all those calls didn't come. So I think it's a perceived, like, we just don't have it anymore. But what if, when that what if is like, all right, well, after school, you can pick them up, or you'll figure it out. You just got to plan a little bit better, maybe, instead of just this immediacy that we always have. But schools that were worried about that, because they were like, okay, yeah, it's an issue, it's a concern, it's a valid concern. But when faced with, okay, well, we'll do this for you so that you might, you'll never have to worry about what if I need to get in contact with my kid, the results were quite marginal in how much that was actually used. So I
Yes.
don't know. I see that too as kind of like, an old, holding on to the vestiges of how we did stuff. And if we want to keep evolving and moving forward as a society, we have to model these kinds of things. And I think that schools have to kind of just say, yeah, no, this is what we're doing. And we promise you, if there's an emergency, you'll have contact with your kid. But it doesn't justify why we're going to, let kids drive a car without wearing a seatbelt, for example.
I'm glad.
Um,
I'm really glad to hear that because I know that was one of the big concerns that we kept hearing about. And
yeah.
yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And I want to get back to a point in your article where you talked about pretty like powerful statement that limiting phones, it's not just about grades, it's about protecting adolescent health. And like if you could sit down like with a teacher now, like concretely in your office right now, and show them one simple either image or tell them one powerful story between like the use of like the phone saturation type of thing, and student mental health, um, what would that be? Like, what would you want them to feel about the why they're limiting the use of cell phones?
Right, right. Well, I mean, it brings me back to a little bit what I was saying about the attachment theory and about kids needing to grow up naturally without things getting in the way. And a lot of times with teachers, that's what I want to convey is that you got to build a strong relationship with your kids. Oftentimes, the start of the school year, we'll do a lot of PD around how do I build good relationships with my students? Because we know if you don't create that foundation, people to people, no good, right? You're going to be struggling probably right around this time of the year, December into January, where it just feels like you have no relationship with them. They don't care what you say, and we hate getting to that. That's just like the worst. So screens without them, it allows for those deeper relationship building that kids absolutely need. If they don't feel attached to somebody that's not a peer but an adult, a higher level person, um, their development as a person really suffers. So in the same way with teachers, I say that is that if we're not building these strong relationships, you're not going to build the trust, you're not going to build that they know you're in it for the good reason, right? And that has a ton of repercussions if you don't have that, and tons of great benefits when you do that, where the kids believe you. They know that you're out there for their best intention. And that's what we really want to push is that if we're both working in that same direction together, I'm supporting you, you're trusting me, I'm going to let you have your freedoms, but you're going to, I'm going to be able to kind of direct you along the way as we go. Because one thing that Dr. Neufeld, Gordon Neufeld, and all of his disciples talk about is that if we're not developing those relationships, teenagers, peers start to build those attachments to each other. And that's kind of where social media filled that void in because they weren't feeling particularly attached at home, not feeling particularly attached at school. The only way I ever felt attached was through my social media people or through my peers. And we know that that becomes much more of a competitive um, relationship rather than a caring, giving relationship. And that is where we see a lot of this anxiety and stress and depression in our kids is that they're trying to replace an adult attachment to either a social media attachment or a school, a peers relationship that just won't help that student grow in the end. So we see the parallels are pretty attached. There's a lot of comparison that you can do between that, and we don't want kids replacing attachment to an adult to a device. And the stats were showing that, particularly with our youngest girls going into women, they're getting massacred on there. Self-image and I'm not like them, and why can't I be this way? And it so harmful. And that's what you occupy yourself with, these thoughts of I'm not good enough. I'm not the same. Like these comparative. Between peer kind of thing. Like you can't have proper relationships if you're competing all the time. So that more importance for those attachment theories and where that cell phone took the competition away, from developing those relationships. It's kind of like without those there, we have room for that now. And I would even push this at home too, Nicole, because I know parents, they're overworked, they're overstressed, they live in this crazy world we all live in. We've been through it. We went through COVID together. We know our kids are struggling, but parents have to get stronger with saying no because you were the adult in the room. And sometimes kids, they just don't have those filters yet, particularly at younger ages when they're looking to online people for validation of themselves rather than real people and adults, for example. So it's tough at home, I'm sure. And that we kind of knew that that might be some of the negative side, is that the kid had no phone all day. They're going to go home and just gorge, they'll just be on the thing all the time. But know that the teachers are doing this to help your child, and see it as a partnership, that we both have to work on this together. One of the things about the band that I was less happy about was that, yeah, it kind of put a seal on everything and kind of pushed it off to the side, where we didn't deal with the underlining problems of why. Like, we know it's an addictive thing, we know it's causing harm to our kids, but what are we going to do about it? We need to start talking about, for example, the well-being aspect, the equity, the biases of these things, the algorithms, what they do to us, how do they trick us? Like, if we're having those conversations about it, you can ban anything in the world and it's not going to stick. So I think without the cells in there is our opportunity now to start talking about the topics around digital literacy, AI literacy, all of that stuff. Is like, how are we going to get our kids informed about it, thinking critically, problem solving, validating things, knowing when things are a scam and not a scam? If we don't let them practice that, they'll leave high school and they're going to just do the same thing they've always done. So it's not only our moral obligation, I think, as a society to get those out, but we have to start teaching it in schools. And sadly, it's been far too often, this is everybody's responsibility and nobody's responsibility. So we
Yeah,
don't see a lot of leverage going on, where they're taking the time to say, okay, let's look at an AI large learning model and look at bias. How might it be biased? Why would it be biased? Like, so that the kids are thinking and talking, and, like, if we eliminate the space for distractions, let's bring in stuff that is important and not a distraction.
yeah. So teaching them the reason behind the bans, and in terms of educating them, raising awareness. You've said a lot in everything you've just said. I agree 100% with that, because in terms of what you were saying for parents, for example, for families, my son is 8 years old. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have access to any social media accounts, and I don't think he should either at that age. But it's at that age, I think, that you need to start having those conversations. His little friends are playing
Totally.
online games where he wants to be playing them as well. But
Totally.
as parents, as adults, I think we do need to say no, as you mentioned, and explaining the why. So I have kids
Yeah,
need to know why. So, for
absolutely.
example, when they ask you, well, if you don't know the answer, check your phone knows. Well, not quite. That's not quite how it works with the algorithms and the information, but just explaining that, having conversations, and what you mentioned about too, the dangers online.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I agree. It's interesting for me. It always has been, where we have, as parents today, we tend to have issues with sending them outside to play because of the dangers of the
Mm-hmm.
physical world. But yet, if we're putting them on the phone or on the tablet, they're in our house, so they're safe. But the dangers online, like, we do need to have a lot of cybersecurity awareness around, like, what's happening online. So
Totally.
everything you've said, I find it's so important in terms of that attachment piece, and
Mm-hmm.
the relationship building part of it. It's yeah, I think you've pretty
Yeah.
much, in a nutshell, summarized why the ban took place, like why people were all in favor of it and voted for it. But I think it's now the piece we need to kind of deal with is the implementation part, what we're replacing the phones in the hallways with, and how we're educating our youth to understand why we've done it, and just keep having those pieces, like, for awareness and educating.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
We have to keep talking about it. It's the only way things get move forward, is just having that dialogue continuously. And I think that we live in this rapidly changing world, right? Like, I read a study a couple of days ago about AI, and just how the turnover now of AI is 7 months. 7 months, it's all like new again. And how do we get a kid ready for that kind of rapid change, and adaptability? Well, you teach them, you put them in environments where they have to make decisions quickly. They have to critically think about things. They have to collaborate and communicate with one another. We do have a digital competency framework that that the whole province is supposed to embrace. It's not like we don't have the frameworks out there. We know what the kinds of things we need to prepare these kids for. We might not know what jobs they're going to do with it, but if we have this more of a skill onus on things rather than content driven. So basically I'm saying is that I think this ban also is opening up a bigger conversation for what we do in schools, right? We want time back, we want less distractions, awesome. But what are you going to do to
With
fill
that
those
time.
gaps, so that it is engaging for the kids, because the kids are tuning out with their phones because they're not engaged, right? Like you're competing with a pretty powerful competition. All right, well, now the competition's out of the way. Now we got to step our game up to get those kids back engaged in the learning process. And it can be exciting. But again, that's a bigger, I think that a lot of these things expose a lot of the weaknesses we have within the education system that again need to be talked about and thought about. And I just briefly touched on AI, but AI is doing the same exact thing. And I'm going to pose this question because somebody posed this to me and they said, how do we not make the same mistakes we made with social media, with AI, in the sense that we didn't really address a lot of the key components around social media and the effects it was going to have on our kids until, our kids were getting depressed and checking out, not coming to school anymore. And we're like, interesting. And we kind of missed the boat on that with all that digital citizenship that is embedded in our curriculum. And then my reflection on them was like, we have AI now, this whole new tipping point that's come out. It can transform our schools. It's going to transform everything that we do. It will affect. How do we make sure that we don't repeat that same mistake that we did with social media with AI? And right now in Quebec, we're in this kind of wait and see phase, right? Where teachers can use certain aspects of AI, but kids across the province are not allowed to use AI. Now, we can talk about it, but they cannot use it because of security issues and all of that bill. I forget what bill it is. So many bills out there, but it was
Yeah.
for, cybersecurity and stuff like that. So we're in this position now where we see this train barreling down the road again. It could go in the same direction as social media did with our kids. And again, we're just kind of caught flat footed again. So having conversations is good, but I think that these global conversations we need to start having across the country. A kid in Vancouver is going to experience the same kind of bullying online as a kid in BC or Quebec or PEI, wherever it is. Having a
Yeah.
national conversation about this, because there's bans almost everywhere across the country. They're all kind of a degree of differences in them, but there is this acknowledgement that screens inside classrooms are probably not beneficial if they're not used for something specific within the lesson, right? So it is a conversation I think we need to bring major players together and start figuring out how can we do this effectively. Because if we don't start, for example, like I said, addressing the artificial intelligence um, card that's flying in front of every educator right now, again, I'm worried for our kids. I'm worried for their future and how prepared they're going to be to navigate, the barriers that are going to be thrown in front of them for sure as they grow up.
I'm glad you mentioned that because even though it wasn't, we hadn't planned on talking about that. It's intertwined into everything digital literacy we're talking
Mhm.
about. So, and that's probably the number, not probably, it is the number one subject that we get approached at École branchée and engaged learning in terms of how we can help teachers and how we can help professionals in education to educate and to know how to address this topic with students. And
Totally.
outside of Quebec, we work with a lot of the school boards, the Francophone school boards, mostly in the other provinces. And I'm actually working on an article right now to kind of look at what's happening province
Hmm.
by province and some school boards by school boards. In provinces like Ontario, for example, there's not current legislation at the ministry level for like as a guideline at the provincial level. So
Right.
boards are doing on the francophone side anyways, they're doing board by board is kind of doing their own thing. Some of them are very advanced and they're actually in this classrooms with students. They're actually
Mhm.
testing it out and using it with students. New Brunswick as well, but it's really different. Like you mentioned, there's no national guidelines as of right now. So I think it's really important to not miss that boat again, like with social media. So I really
Yeah.
thank you for mentioning that. And it's funny because
Hmm.
a whole different conclusion planned out, but we're just going to scrap that. I think that was a good way to kind of like bring our audience and our listeners to think about the importance of digital literacy and why having these conversations and thinking about the why behind all of this, the bans, why we're thinking the way we're thinking, and what we need to do to
Hmm.
get to the next steps. Are there
Yeah.
concluding words
Yeah.
that you'd like to leave with our listeners? I know I mentioned already your Shift Ed podcast. So for people
Yeah.
listening to us, are there your next conversations that are planned or things that you'd like to leave our audience with?
Sure. Well, we're ongoing with Shift Ed podcast. We've had some great guests. We just recently published one with the CEO of Nelson, who who went from a textbook company to a technology company. Um, and that was fascinating, his journey. And we talked a lot about leadership and how do you get big movements like this going in the same direction? How do you get people moving in the same direction? So it does hit on these kinds of things because we are going to need leadership that can bring us to a place that we're all comfortable with. How and when I don't have answers for that yet, but I'm sure they'll be coming. And
Yeah.
for teachers out there, one practical thing that I'm going to leave you with. We talked about boredom and we talked about letting kids be in boredom. And not only that, but be in rest and have time to think. And one activity that I did when I was teaching is every morning the kids would come in and they'd have a journal. And I would put a question up either on something we had talked about or something that we had a conversation that kids were interested in kind of knowing more about. And we would take the first 10 minutes of class to just write. I didn't care how much they wrote, what they wrote about, but that they had the time to kind of just sit quietly and write something. I had other teachers that would do the same thing, but it would be for reading. You know, a comic, whatever you want. Bring a magazine, a book. We're going to just sit. We're going to have silence, and we're going to just enjoy that for before we start. It sets a tone for a class that we respect thinking and thought, and having that kind of deeper thinking happen when there's nothing distracting you and you have to think about yourself. These are small little things that can be done, but are very effective when you're trying to just realign kids from this immediacy that they're so wanting all the time, from video games to social media to whatever it might be. Just finding some time for personal thought, and that sense of, oh, this is boring. Awesome. I love it when you say that. Now get going.
I love that you ended on that note because it's often the little things that are the most effective. And having that moment to just like stop with your thoughts and take that time, I think it's so important. So thank you for leaving us with that very important note. I definitely want to thank you for sharing your insights with us, Chris. Very, very much appreciate it. It
Thank
helps
you.
us to deepen our understanding of this important topic. And it's always, always a pleasure to learn from your experience and perspective. And before we conclude today's meeting, I just want to share my screen one final time
Mhm.
just to make sure our audience knows that on the website for Engage Learning, .com-training. This is where we always post our recordings when we have special events or different conversations. So this conversation also will be placed there. And if you need to reach out to me for anything at all, my email is here. We also have our news feed that is completely free, and we always post on education and different topics that you might find interesting and relevant. And to book a meeting with me, here is my info. And thank you so much for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks so much, everyone.